begin today's hearing with LB440 and Senator Spivey.
Well, thank you, Chair Merman. I think this is my first time in front of education, so I'm glad to be here with y'all today. I am Ashlei Spivey, ASH, LEI, S, P as in Paul, I, V as in Victor, EY, representing District 13, which is Northeast and Northwest Omaha. And I'm really proud to introduce to you today LB440, which establishes the Education Leave and Support Act to provide critical support for Nebraska's teachers and school districts. The Education Leave and Support Act addresses a pressing need in our education system by creating the State Education Leave Fund. This fund will reimburse school districts for the cost of long-term substitute teachers during the first 6 weeks of Certified Teachers Family and Medical Leave Act. It will pay for the cost of that leave, or FMLA, of that certified teacher for the first 6 weeks, and allocate unused funds to be used for the Teacher Retention and Recruitment Fund. I put a definition because I think sometimes folks forget inside of your synopsis paper that I handed out, but FMLA is not just around maternity and paternity leave. You take the leave, FMLA, for significant health and life events, and it's really important, I think, in this climate and where we are, that people have what they need in order to navigate those health events and not have to choose between their health and their job. I think about when I had my last son, my now almost 2.5-year-old, and I needed to take a course, maternity leave, once he was born. And I've talked about this. I suffered from severe postpartum depression and anxiety. And so I needed additional time to not only work on my mental health, but also to show up and be the parent that I needed for him. And I was fortunate to have an employer in U.S. Bank that allowed for my FMLA to be paid for 3 months. And then I could use my PTO for the longer need that I had to take. And outside of my maternity leave, my sister during the pandemic was diagnosed, well, really not even diagnosed, had an extreme medical condition where we thought she was not going to make it. My sister is now 27, so at 22 years old, she was admitted to the hospital immediately, and she was in the cancer and COVID ward, and again, the signs were that she was not going to make it past the next 2 weeks, and she ended up being in the hospital for 3 months. I was her guardian as a young person under 19. Our mother passed away, so I was her legal guardian, and so I was her caretaker during that health event. And again, if I did not have this paid family medical leave, I would have had to try to choose between being there for my sister and navigating something that we did not even plan on, and then still supporting my child and my family. And so I think this bill and what it brings forward is really, really important. And this matters because it prevents teacher burnout and turnover. It strengthens our education workforce, which we have talked about a lot since I've been in the body. It promotes long-term savings by reducing the costs associated with hiring and training new teachers. And we can really focus on those long-term substitutes. And it really invests in the stability of Nebraska's classrooms, benefiting our students and our communities statewide. And so with LB 440, it establishes a payroll fee of 0.35% on a certified teacher's taxable wages, and it's matched by the school districts. And this will start January 1, 2026. It would then create this education leave fund that would cover the cost for the long-term substitutes, as well as the certified teacher's leave, ensuring that teachers can take FMLA without exhausting their personal and sick leave, which we see to be a problem now. Teachers, if they have to take paternity leave or maternity leave, if they have this life event, they're going to have to exhaust their sick or PTO time in order to cover that, again, to ensure that they are paid. And then it also creates the Education Retention Fund to redirect surplus funds towards addressing teacher shortages and professional development, which again has been a topic of this body since I've been in the legislature, around how do we really invest in one of the most critical positions across our state. So this bill aligns with Nebraska's commitment to supporting educators, much like other workforce, and it supports and creates programs that we see like unemployment insurance or workers' comp. With teacher burnout and shortages at critical levels, there is no reason to leave our educators without adequate support during significant life events. As I mentioned, this current system that we have in place forces teachers to dip into limited leave banks or forego income, all while districts struggle to afford substitutes. And I don't know anyone, at least in my circle, who can afford to forego income, right, because of a life event. And so this is really making sure that people have what they need to be able to manage that significant life event and still not give up on their career or leave the workforce. And so when you look at the nuts and bolts of LB40, it changes our current circumstance by ensuring that teachers receive the support for their first 6 weeks of FMLA leave. It reimburses those districts for those substitutes, and that cost is determined by the State Board of Education. This bill also leverages sustainable funding, and so through the payroll contributions, we're not asking for state appropriations. You may see it on the fiscal note. However, we do have an amendment that you all have with you as well that looks at a specific cash fund that does have money available to be able to pay for the startup costs and the managing of this program. But because of the payroll tax that the employee pays in, as well as the employer, which is a school district, the cost of FMLA coverage is paid for. So it does have a pay source, and it does not require any additional state appropriations. And then again, as of January 2026, the State Education Leave Fund will start to collect those fees and start reimbursing July 1, 2026. I believe this is a really good policy because it brings Nebraska's education system in line with modern workforce needs, supporting teacher retention and student stability. It addresses some of the gender-based disparities in leave policies, especially for our young women who are mostly affected by limited paid leave options, and ensures fiscal responsibility because we have built-in annual audits as well as transparent reporting to the legislature. So there is that accountability and oversight, which I think is important. When you think about the impact that it has on teachers, right, like I don't think teachers make enough in general. So like what would this mean for them to have this payroll deduction? When you look at it, it's about a $20 a month investment from them. And so when you kind of put it into that context, to be able to invest $20 a month into this pool and then to be able to use it when they have a significant life event, I think is very impactful and is worth that investment. So some of just kind of context around other states that are doing this. So there's 13 other states in DC that have mandatory paid family medical leave laws in place. A lot of these other states have a longer leave period and they don't cover 100% of that salary. So for example, Colorado's program covers 12 weeks, but it provides 90% of their average weekly wages instead of the 100% the teachers would continue to receive. And they use a 0.9% payroll tax deduction. So again, this is, when you look at the market, we're very reasonable in what we're asking and contributing of the employer and the employee. This is also happening in the public sector. And so in 2023, the Department of Labor did a study in Lincoln area businesses, and it showed that 44% of the businesses offered some sort of paid family medical leave, and that 7.5% offered it to some of their employees and 36% offered it to all employees. It does vary by employer, but I will say again that this industry that we're in, education, needs to keep up with other competitive markets, and we're seeing it again happen in the private sector. And I would always argue that teachers are some of our most important industry and frontline workers, and so they need competitive benefits. They need this the FMLA support in order to be able to stay in the workforce, keep educating our future leaders and workforce of the future, and making sure that they can do that in balance and in harmony with their families. And then lastly, this still allows for local control. So this mirrors other programs that we operate at the state level. So think our statewide insurance program or how we pool our retirement. And so this allows us to spread out the risk and benefits, and especially will support smaller districts where they don't have to implement a policy on their own and bear that burden. And so again, you do have the two amendments that would fix just a technical language there, as well as the pay source of that cash fund for the administration of the program. You also have a synopsis that kind of breaks out the nuts and bolts of the policy. And with that, I will welcome any questions that you have on LB440.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Spivey this time? Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman Merman. Thank you for bringing this, Senator Spivey. I have a couple questions, if that's okay. Are we one question I was gonna ask is, what happens if the money collected isn't enough to cover all the leave requests that are out there? Or is there some backup? Do you know what I'm saying? If the pot of money, which I love how you figured out how to fund this on its own and things.
Yeah, so from our looking at like previous like time off and what does it look like for the district, it looks like there would be a balance, like that there would not be.
Because I saw you've got in place if you've collected too much.
Yeah.
I just didn't know if there's something on the backside of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. So I think we did our math correctly, that it looks like that based on the amount that we are having for the payroll deduction, that there is enough in that pot of money to cover what we have seen historically around FMLA leave. But I think that's a great piece that I can make sure that I explore with my partners around this in fiscal, so that there's not if there is a deficit, that we can address it.
Yeah. And then, so I was glad to hear it's running on average $20 a month is what it would cost out of the teacher's pay, which then on the flip side, every school, it's also $20 on average for all their teachers. So it doesn't cost the state more, but it will cost the districts more. And
Absolutely.
I just want to make sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point to uplift, which I think it's an investment for the districts, right? So when you
retention is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we think that based on what other states have done, from, like I mentioned, Colorado has that 0.9%, like that we are in a good medium space of what we are asking people to pay into this pool of money, and the benefits that we'll have will be outsized, and I think it's worth that investment.
And then my last question is, how does this, because this is not just for a certain type of leave, it's any FMLA leave. How does this work in conjunction with some schools? Like, I came from a district that they had a sick bank locally at that local level, where if Senator Meyer and I are both teachers, I put in a day and he puts in a day, and something happens, with my, whatever, I get sick or whatever, I can pull from that. Will those still, you think, exist, or do you think this will kind of do away with the districts already doing this at the local level?
No, so this is not to replace any sort of interventions or support that at the local level are happening, and my hope is that districts will continue that, because like that sick bank is very particular. If you have a kid sick, right? PTO is still accruing, sick leave is still accruing, it doesn't change that. These are for the FMLA eligible activities in that definition that I listed, that can include maternity and paternity, but that really health event that happens, which you can take FMLA, it's just unpaid. And so people still are going to take FMLA. This just says to be competitive in the market, to retain folks, keep doing what you're doing, and this also offers 6 weeks, which makes it more competitive and allows for people to stay within their job and not have to choose between their income and their health event.
By law, it's 12-week is the option. So this pays you for the so you could use the sick bank for X amount of days, and then this kicks in. Okay.
Yeah, and this doesn't cover the full FMLA eligible leave time, just the 6 weeks. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Senator Hughes. I appreciate your questions.
Any other questions? Senator Meyer.
Thank you, Chair Merman. Just for clarification, I think I've read in here what it applies, but you take the Family Medical Leave Act 6 weeks first, and then back up with this particular program.
So how it would work, so say I have to be a caregiver for my mom who's now in hospice, and so I can apply for FMLA, and under the law I have the 12 weeks unpaid. That protects me to have my job when I come back. This just says the first 6 weeks, because I'm teaching, that I'll need a long-term substitute, so it would cover my long-term substitute to ensure continuity in the classroom, and then it would cover my first 6 weeks only for me to leave to go care for my mom that is in hospice. And then to Senator Hughes' point, if I have PTO or sick leave that I want to use to be paid for that other time on my FMLA, I can. This just covers the first 6 weeks. And I do want to name that NAEP, so our Union for State Employees, they actually just negotiated this in their contract as well, to have paid time under FMLA. So we are seeing again that this is becoming a benefit that is more common than not, because we know that folks are going to need it to stay in the workforce.
May I ask one more question?
Yeah, sure.
And so the use of this paid sick leave or paid time off corresponds with the same reasons with Family Medical Leave Act. There's no other additional caveats or anything of that nature.
Absolutely, Senator, you are correct.
Thank you.
Any
Thank you,
other
Senator Meyer.
questions? Senator Lineski.
Thank you, Chair Merman. Thank you for bringing this, Senator Spivey. So, does the teacher need a medical note, a doctor's note to say, I'm getting this time off, or I require this extra time off?
Yes,
Okay.
so this will still follow all of FMLA protocol and processes where you have to
Okay.
submit information. So none of that changes the actual federal policy around FMLA.
Okay.
So
I'm
all of that,
curious-
yep, all of that is still
I'm
applicable.
just curious on the adoption of a child, how that would work, but I can look
Yep,
into that as well.
yeah.
So, thank
So
you.
yep, as long as it falls under FMLA and it's a eligible reason, then they can use their 6 weeks for that eligible reason.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Any other questions? Senator Conrad.
Thank you, Chair Merman. Thank you, Senator. Good to see you. Appreciate this bill being brought forward in this hearing here today. And I'm sorry if you covered this in your opening when I was introducing another bill, but maybe it would just be helpful for the committee moving forward. I just want to put a reminder on record if we could maybe get a chart or a little one-pager put together about how your proposal might interface with existing FMLA protections, either to complement or contrast where there's holes or gaps that need to be filled in. It's kind of hard to get through all of that in a committee level hearing today, but that might just be something helpful so that we can
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
kind of be on the same page of that working forward. And then to add to that homework, perhaps, I'd also wonder if maybe we could have a brief analysis with your staff or committee staff too about if there's any implications or intersections with the sick leave law recently approved by voters in Nebraska here as well, just to make sure that we're taking that into account and building upon that clear sentiment from the electorate in regards to how they want us to continually make progress in this state to provide not only good wages but thoughtful benefits like sick leave to
absolutely.
folks so that they don't have to choose between their job and an illness. I think that was another issue that just popped up. And then if you want a chance to respond to this, or perhaps other members behind you will, I know that a sick leave bank can be a lifeline for people sometimes when they've burned through their time and they're sick or they're caring for somebody who's sick, and they just need that little bit of extra help so that they don't have to walk away from their job. But I also worry about that really puts the solution squarely on the employees to then give up their own time to put into a bank. And it's uncertain about how much time will be in that bank and will be available. And it really lets the employers off the hook, and in this instance, big government. It lets the schools off the hook instead, and puts the onus on the teachers themselves to essentially be good Samaritans and provide leave for their colleagues, which I know they're generous and willing to do, but that approach has a significant amount of limitation and policy concern as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you named it. It has limitations, and we want to be competitive to retain teachers. We want to make sure that people can have that harmony and balance and do what they need to do. And so I think you will hear some really great testimonies of like real life, what this looked like for our teachers, and I'm excited to not take their thunder, so
Yes,
I won't
yes, very good.
speak on that piece. But I do think in terms of a policy for us as a body, and why I wanted to bring it is because I think we have a responsibility to our workforce, just like you named with the voters saying that they want paid sick leave. Like we've seen through the pandemic, especially, right, when a life event happens, and what does that mean for you to have to choose between taking care of your family, managing that life event? We know that we struggle with keeping bodies inside of jobs now, and so we have to have and create a competitive market that takes care of people and honors the work that they are doing. And I think this bill does that. It allows for people to take, and again, this is chipping away at it. It's only 6 weeks. So this is allowing for people to take that 6 weeks of paid FMLA to manage that life event, hopefully within that 6 weeks, and then they can leverage their PTO and other sick time in a way that they needed, but it doesn't burn it because, again, we know that those life events keep happening. And so teachers are critical to our future in Nebraska. They are on the front lines. I know there's 2 former school board members and folks that have worked in that space. And so, I mean, we know the importance of keeping teachers, having them work with the future with our young people, and I think this allows and addresses some of the issues that we have been wrestling with on a number of fronts.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Conrad, and I put the 2 notes for some of the follow-up for the committee.
And thank you. I just got another follow-up question. I think you've kind of answered it, but with the recent vote of the people on paid family leave, is this bill still necessary, and if so, why? And maybe we'll hear more about it
Yeah,
later, too.
absolutely. And I'll pull the difference between paid sick leave and how that interfaces with FMLA because there's some technical differences from like a federal perspective in HR. And so this really sits in paid family medical leave. So FMLA is where this sits, and we're paying for that versus sick leave is a little bit different. And so I'll put together that chart so that you can clearly see what does that look like from that ballot initiative that passed and then how this impacts this.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No, thank you, Chair.
Yep. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. And I will be here to close. I have a hearing across for appropriations and I'm third in another room. So I may kind of be bouncing in, but I will be here to close, okay?
Okay, we hope you can be here. Yes. 40. Any neutral testifiers for LB440? If not, Senator Spivey, you're welcome to close.
Thank you again, Chair Merman, and again, appreciate the grace of me running around to all of these different hearing rooms during this hearing. But I hope that does not reflect the lack of my commitment to this bill and the impact that I believe that it has. And I also want to thank you all for sitting through the testimony. I know it makes our days a lot longer, but these folks came again on their own and had such powerful, impactful personal stories that I think really uplift the reason why I wanted to bring this bill, and again, the impact that I think that it would have. And so the only thing that I have left to add, I just wanted to circle back from some of the conversation, is that there are some exemptions in paid sick leave. And so my team in my office has started to pull that language of how it doesn't impact FMLA and what does that look like. And so I will get you all that table so that you can compare and that you can see. And again, you know, I think the reason why I wanted to come to the legislature and I think why we work every day is that we want to ensure working families have what they need. And teachers are an integral part of our society, from educating our young people to adding to the workforce and economy. And they can't do that when they are humans too, and they have to make that decision, hard decision of what they have to prioritize. And I think we saw that uplifted, that folks had to make really hard decisions that impacted them personally because they wanted to prioritize the children that they work with every day. And this bill is starting to chip away at that and make it easier, have more harmony in them, having their very important job that they're present for, but also their very important role within their family. And so I appreciate you all taking the time to listen to all of those stories today, again, to hear about LB440. And I encourage you to move this out of committee, and I will make sure that I send you the follow-up information that I promised, and would be happy to answer any last questions that the committee has.
Thank you. Any questions for Senator Spivey? Senator Juarez.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Spivey, for bringing forth this bill. I think it is an excellent idea to have this benefit available for our teachers. But after all the testimony, it helped me to think of more questions to ask that I initially didn't when you were up here before. One question that I had was, what if a teacher moves to another school district? Is like this benefit going to go along with them, that whatever school district they're in, they'll still get the benefit of this?
Yes, that's correct, Senator Juarez, because this is across the state, so it's not within specific districts, which you kind of heard some of those stories that each district has their own kind of practice or policy. This is statewide, so if they move a district, then they would still be able to utilize this benefit.
Okay, and another question that I thought of, you mentioned that the Department of Education is going to be administering this bill. So I wondered, what about the HR people? Are we going to need to have some HR specialist help also in administering this bill?
Yes, so the Department of Education would work with the traditional folks that administer FMLA, and that's why you see in the fiscal note some overhead in operations, because they have to administer it. They have to have the infrastructure. And so that is where we have built in the cash fund revenue for that versus having it come out of general fund, and that's what that amendment speaks to.
Okay, another question I thought of was, it mentions here that there's going to be an annual audit by the auditor, and I wondered, had you discussed that responsibility with them beforehand? I mean, I have no idea about their workload, so I wondered if this is something that's going to, they'll be able to fit it in with no problem.
Yeah, so usually with FMLA claims and cases, there's annual review, like from an HR perspective and all of that. And so this would be a part of a typical process just within a new program.
Okay, thank you. I definitely feel that this is going to be an excellent benefit to attract, potential teachers to our state. And I really see that as a definite benefit, a recruitment tool. But I also wondered, again, about another program that was mentioned, the short-term disability. Are you confident that this is going to work okay with that program too? And if it impacts it, I was a little concerned about that.
Yeah, it doesn't impact it because what we're saying is FMLA is a federal program. So FMLA works with short-term and long-term disability now. FMLA creates the protection that you get to keep your job in these life events. You're able to come back. So what we're saying is when there's an FMLA eligible event based on federal definition, which is in that synopsis, that you get the 6 weeks paid of that. And so, as mentioned earlier, the 6 weeks work with, coupled with like the typical 2 weeks that you may see available, get you to short-term disability and then long-term if you have to continue that case. And so this doesn't change any federal programs that already exist. This is just saying that you get your 6 weeks paid of FMLA. And so these programs will still work together in the way in which they do now.
Okay, and then my final question is, I'm assuming that since there were no opponents here, I guess, then that's saying that the school districts across the state are supportive of
Everyone
adding
loves it,
this, or
Senator
did you hear
Juarez, and
from
they're
that?
excited watching from their offices. No, so as the representative, Tim from NSEA talked about, and I asked that question too, how do the districts feel? Because he holds that relationship, I asked him to make sure he talks to the districts, and I think, they want to invest in their teachers as well, and they understand that recruitment and retention is an issue. And so they are willing to work with us on this. They're not opposed to this bill. They are willing to work with us on this. And so that's why they did not come in opposition or in that way. But we have been in communication because that is important. So I appreciate you uplifting that. But again, we've been doing that legwork to talk to the districts.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Juarez.